Imagine waking up on the most important day of the year, your harvest day, only to find that the very tractor you depend on to bring food from the fields to the table has been towed away by someone who thinks they own the neighborhood. What would you do if the heart of your work was stolen right from under you, not by a thief in the night but by a neighbor hiding behind the rules of an HOA? This isn't just a story about crops or a tractor. It's about dignity, livelihood, and a shocking twist that no one saw coming. Stick around because what happens next will leave you speechless. Meet Daniel, a hard-working farmer who had built his life around the land. Every morning, before the sun peeked over the horizon, he was already in his fields, tending to the soil, caring for crops, and ensuring that each season brought abundance. Farming wasn't just his job. It was his passion, his legacy, and his entire existence. But not everyone saw it that way. Living in a community governed by a strict HOA meant Daniel often found himself at odds with people who valued rules on paper more than real lives. At the center of this storm was a woman everyone knew, Karen. Known for her clipboard, her sharp eyes, and her obsession with rules, Karen had made it her mission to police every detail of the neighborhood. Grass too long, letter in the mailbox, fence an inch too high, warning notice. But Daniel's tractor parked by the edge of his property became her favorite target. For years she complained about how it was an eyesore, completely ignoring the fact that this tractor was Daniel's lifeline. As harvest season approached, Daniel was excited but stressed. The crops were finally ready, and timing was everything. He had workers lined up, buyers waiting, and contracts with the state that depended on this very harvest. Every minute mattered, and the tractor was the key to it all. But Karen saw something else, an opportunity to flex her authority. One morning, Daniel walked outside only to find an empty patch of dirt where his tractor had been parked the night before. Confused and alarmed, he rushed around thinking maybe one of his workers had moved it. But no. His phone buzzed with a voicemail, and the voice on the other end sent chills down his spine. "This is the HOA. Your tractor has been towed due to repeated violations. It will remain impounded until all fees and penalties are paid." Daniel's jaw clenched. Towed? On harvest day? How could someone be so heartless, so blind to what this meant not just for him, but for the entire community who relied on his crops? He stormed into the HOA office where Karen sat smugly behind the desk. "You can't do this," he said, his voice steady but sharp. "That tractor isn't just a vehicle, it's my business, my responsibility to feed people." Karen leaned back, her lips curling into a smirk. "Rules are rules, Daniel. This is a neighborhood, not a farm equipment lot. You should know better." Rehook. Because here's the part Karen didn't know. Daniel wasn't just farming for himself. His land, his equipment, and his contracts were tied directly to the state. He leased the entire farmland to the Department of Agriculture, ensuring food supply not just for local markets but for schools, hospitals, and community programs. Every ear of corn, every bushel of wheat, every crate of vegetables mattered. And with one selfish action, Karen had jeopardized it all. But Daniel didn't shout. He didn't beg. Instead, he pulled out a folder from his bag, thick with papers and official seals. He laid it on the counter in front of her. "Do you know what this is?" Karen blinked, clearly caught off guard. "This is my lease with the state. Every acre of this land, every crop, every harvest, it doesn't just belong to me. It belongs to the people who depend on it. And by towing that tractor, you haven't just interfered with my work, you've interfered with the state." Karen's smugness wavered. The room grew quiet. Daniel continued, his words deliberate. "Do you understand the scale of what you've done? You've put an entire food program at risk. You've crossed a line no HOA has the authority to cross." The rehook grows stronger here, because Karen's little power play was about to explode into something far bigger than she could control. Within hours, Daniel was on the phone with state officials. They were furious. This wasn't just a dispute between neighbors anymore. It was a disruption of contracts worth millions, affecting thousands of lives. The state legal team descended on the HOA, demanding explanations, documents, and accountability. Karen, who once thrived on sending letters and issuing fines, now found herself cornered by people with far more power than she ever imagined. But Daniel wasn't done. He knew that in farming, timing was everything. He rallied his workers, rented temporary equipment from neighboring farmers, and pushed forward with the harvest. It wasn't easy, but he refused to let Karen's pettiness ruin everything. As the crops rolled in, trucks hauled them away, feeding communities and fulfilling contracts. Every grain of corn harvested became a silent reminder that resilience could outlast arrogance. Meanwhile, the HOA board scrambled to contain the fallout. Lawsuits were threatened, news reporters began circling, and Karen's name was suddenly on everyone's lips. She had gone from neighborhood enforcer to the face of recklessness. And Daniel? He didn't gloat. He didn't celebrate her downfall. Instead, he stood tall, focused on what mattered: his work, his land, his purpose. But the state had its own plans. Weeks later, a letter arrived at Daniel's door. It was official. The HOA's authority over agricultural equipment was void. In fact, the state had taken legal steps to limit the HOA's reach altogether, ensuring that farming operations would never again be interfered with by overzealous neighbors. The rehook continues, because here's where it gets sweeter. Not only did Daniel get his tractor back with all fees waived and apologies issued, but the state also compensated him for the disruption, funding improvements for his farm. New equipment, better storage, expanded fields. The very attempt to weaken him had only made him stronger. As for Karen, she faced the community she had once controlled. Neighbors who once tolerated her strictness now turned against her. Parents who relied on school lunches, patients who depended on hospital food, families who appreciated fresh produce. They all saw her as the reason their supply had been endangered. The clipboard was gone. The smugness was gone. All that remained was a woman who had let her obsession with rules destroy her credibility. And Daniel? He rose above it all. Each time he looked at his fields, he remembered that morning when his tractor disappeared, and how it had sparked a chain of events that reminded him of one truth. Real power doesn't come from control, but from contribution. His story became a local legend, told and retold at markets, schools, and gatherings. The farmer whose tractor was towed, only for him to reveal that the land was tied to the state. The man who turned pettiness into triumph. The neighbor who proved that dignity and perseverance always outweigh arrogance. And so, harvest after harvest, Daniel continued his work, not for revenge, not for recognition, but for the quiet pride of knowing that he had defended not just his farm, but his community's future. His tractor roared back to life, his fields glowed golden under the sun, and his story lived on as a reminder. Never underestimate the quiet strength of someone who builds instead of destroys. So what would you have done if your tractor had been taken on harvest day? Would you have fought, given up, or risen higher like Daniel did? If you loved this story of resilience and unexpected triumph, make sure to like, share, and subscribe, because more stories of strength and justice are on the way, and you don't want to miss them.